everybody. Welcome back to the Coloring Your Past podcast. Your host, Dominic, here. We have another amazing group with us today. They're going to share a story about the School for Imbeciles. You guys introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Robert. I'm a senior at Salisbury.
I'm Ty. I'm also a senior.
All right. And they have their story that they've been researching for a while, and they're going to share this lost, forgotten, or ignored story with you all. And we're going to talk about it a little bit. All right. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So first off, let's start. How's your experience at Salisbury been so far?
So far, so good, yeah. This class has been great. A lot of research has gone into our project. It's very interesting so far.
Yeah. How about you?
I've been here a while, so I mean, it's been pretty good. I mean, I haven't had anything bad happen to me here, so I'm pretty happy.
You guys are both enjoying this class and like kind of getting to pick your own research topic and stuff?
Yeah, to find something that you want to learn on, you can learn at your own pace. I think it's really, really nice. And, you can do your own research. You don't really have, like, a teacher digging his nails in your back trying to
force you to,
yeah, exactly, get work out of you.
How about you?
Yeah, I think the flexibility that Mr. McCrisky gives us is key. Like Ty was saying, like we're not doing something that we don't want to do or something that we're not already interested in. And so I think having that level of interest, I think that's what's really like propelled our project and our research and kept us going each day.
So then about your project, tell me a little bit about it. Tell me the story of the School of Imbeciles.
Yeah, so the School for Imbeciles, it was opened in 1858. So it's a house in Salisbury. So I think we'll have to start a little bit before that. So the owner of the house, Henry M. Knight, he's really kind of the focal point of the story. So he was a doctor during the Great Awakening period in Salisbury. So that kind of social climate, there was a lot of religious benevolence. This idea that out of religious ideologies, people should go out of their way to help those in need. So Henry Knight was no exception to this idea. He was a pretty well-known physician in this town. And so he was hired by the General Assembly to work on a board that would investigate imbecility rates. Because at that time, there was a lot of growing crime, and the widespread belief was that immigrants and people with mental disabilities were responsible for the increase in crime. So Henry M. Knight was served on this board, conducted an investigation, and he came to the conclusion that something had to be done to address this issue. And his solution was to form a school, come up with a school that would help these children and hopefully assimilate them back into society as opposed to just leaving them off to fend for themselves.
Right. What at the time did they consider these mental disabilities? What did he focus on?
Obviously, autism, Down syndrome, ones we would think of today, but also epilepsy,
really?
PTSD, ADD, ADHD. So it was pretty wide-ranging and not your stereotypical quote-unquote mental disabilities.
Not what we still consider today as,
Yeah, exactly. So Knight would request funding from the state because he really thought something had to be done. And the state denied his request for funding. So in 1858, he literally took matters into his own hands, and he would open one of the country's first schools of its kind, a school designed to help children with mental disabilities. So he founded the school with the idea that he would teach these children basic household tasks, chopping wood, cutting, sewing, kind of your basic manual labor that would be useful for children and people, particularly in this setting, a rural setting, so they could be useful and
so they could get work and stuff. And kind of integrate back in society.
Productive members of society, yeah. So word would spread around about this school. So Knight would start off with one student, and it would soon grow pretty exponentially. And he'd keep at the school for quite some time, and it'd soon expand. There would be some dormitories added to the property that it was on his own home.
Did he start it? That was his own home originally when he started the...
Yep. So him and his own family lived with these students. So that right in and of itself shows just how dedicated that
was,
Knight was to this goal of his to help those in need. So Knight would keep running this school, and it was really once he died, and kind of the power of the school was shifted over to his son George. The kind of focus of the school really shifted from benevolence to kind of quite literally the polar opposite of that. So his son would take over. Ty's done a lot of research on his son George Knight, so I can pass it over to him to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so George went into power. Not into power. He became superintendent in, I think it was 1851. And
Was that after?
so his Henry Knight died in 1850, and his brother, George's brother, can't remember his name. So he's not really like a big topic. He was there for I think 3 months, and so his
Was
brother
that by
came back.
choice, or did his father leave it
His
to
father
the
left
other
it to
son?
him. But since George went to Yale, he also studied the neurological system, and he saw what his dad was doing, and he would take over. But George really had he had the complete opposite focus of his father. He had different intentions with these children. Since he was at Yale, we have the I can't remember the name.
Eugenics Society.
So the Eugenics Society was stationed at Yale. So he was able to see what other people think about people with mental disabilities. And since he grew up in a different period than his dad and didn't grow up in the Great Awakening, they all were thought to believe that people with mental disabilities were basically the criminals and why the criminal rate was going up. So George took over the school. I think there was about 14 kids when he took over, and it grew to a population of 500. They were able to hold up to 500.
Wow.
So George talked on numerous assemblies. He spoke at numerous meetings, and he talked about what we need to do to solve the problem. So his first thought was we need to basically separate them from society, put them into colonies, and try and sterilize these children.
Wow.
And most of them were girls. I'm pretty sure 92% of people who were enrolled in this school were female, and only 8% were men. And spread from wide range PTSD, which is like the most minor one, up to people with Down syndrome and autism, where you would think they would be in there. But
So like common things that
Yeah.
like epilepsy and stuff that we don't
Yeah.
even.
Yep.
So George basically started. I think he sterilized around five or eight children. But he passed in 18. No, he passed in 1912. The school got up to about 500, and when he passed, his wife Kate basically took over the school. But going back to George, he talked to numerous assemblies about what they needed to do. That he said he wanted to separate them from society, put them into these colonies. Basically, like what the Mansfield school was just what the School for Imbeciles transformed into. But they would take these kids out of society, they put them in colonies and sterilize them. And what that would do is, after time, since they couldn't reproduce, they would stay in this colony, and they would all basically perish, and there would be no more people with mental disabilities. But he never got to doing that, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
So George passed away in 1912, and his wife Kate basically took over. He died of a heart attack at one of his meetings.
Did Kate have a more similar view to George or Henry?
Since she was George's wife, she had a more more of a sense of what he was doing. But she didn't really fully take over the school. So the school went to Mansfield.
It was bought by the state.
Yeah, it was bought by the state, and then it went over to Mansfield. It was about an hour and a half away from the original school. And they would hold up to, I think, 500 students as well. And I don't think we have the exact numbers about how many people they sterilized, but the school was really run down, really bad conditions. And then basically now it's just sitting there to this day, and it's
When did
hollowed out.
when did it like close, or when did they stop taking kids in?
I think around in the mid 1900s. I don't have an exact date of when it stopped, but then it was taken by UConn. I'm pretty sure University of Connecticut basically bought the property, and now it's on their campus.
Nice. So did either George or Henry have any effects on the outside world besides you? Obviously, said George
Yeah.
helped pass that.
So
Bill.
George basically, his views weren't directly his views. Of course, he got input from other people. So his views and having the Eugenics Society, being at Yale, where he basically came into power after he finished his degree. He all of his documents, went around after he passed and after the School for Imbeciles basically was finished. Even prior to that, the Eugenics Society being in New York, at Yale. There were actually a funny story, not a funny story, a really bad one. The Nazis actually went over to Yale and they were able to see documents and see the Eugenics Society, and they took input from what George did and what George wanted to do, along with the committees from different states, and they wanted to they basically looked at what they were doing, separating them into colonies, basically
Do you think that inspired the Holocaust, or
I wouldn't say it inspired the Holocaust, but it gave them somewhat of an idea of what to do.
because they're very similar?
Yeah, they're
kind of
very
ideas.
very similar ideas, putting them into colonies. Yeah, but I wouldn't say he had a direct impact on it, but of course I think it played a little bit of a role. Being able to see these documents and giving them out to the public, being able being them in having them in the Yale Library, it gave Nazis, other people, an opportunity to see what they were doing and get ideas for themselves.
That's insane. I never knew that this story had any connection to the Nazis, or that it had branched out that far.
Yeah.
And it's local history that I didn't even know. So why do you think that George and Henry's views were so different? Because George, obviously, he grew up in this house with these kids, and he saw that they weren't all that bad. So do you think it was just that Yale kind of changed something in him, or do you think he always kind of had that motive?
I think it was definitely both Yale and the time that George grew up in. The belief of Darwinism and eugenics, basically the idea that there are superior races or superior types of people, and that whole adage, survival of the fittest, really came out of this time period. So I think George, being at an impressionable age at one of the most prestigious universities in the world, I feel like all of those ideas really stuck with them. And at the time, the crime rate, like Ty was talking about when George was growing up, was really problematic. And in George's eyes, he was solving a problem, solving something that the people of his town felt was pretty big and pretty problematic. So I think it was mostly the differing time periods that the two grew up in.
Yeah.
I don't know if you think that, Ty, but
Yeah, I 100% agree. Yeah.
All right, so then what I like to do is, with all my guests on the podcast, I like to ask them why you guys think that this story was lost, forgotten, or ignored. And most times it just boils down to just discrimination and stuff. But because your guys' story is so outside of the box, kind of, why do you guys think that it was kind of hidden away or not told? As a local kid, I never knew, and it's right down the road.
Yep. I think the big thing is that, still today there's a stigma around mental health. So when you consider the fact that this occurred over 100 years ago, you consider the fact that sterilization was happening in the U.S. I don't know. I always thought that was a foreign problem, that it didn't really take place in the United States. So I feel like when you consider all of that, I don't know. It's mental health in general is difficult to talk about for some.
Subject, yeah.
So you factor all that in, and it's a recipe for a story that hasn't really been talked about, and one that needs to be.
You agree with that?
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, thank you guys for sharing this story. I had no clue. I think that it's incredible that this existed, and this had a big influence on all institutions like this, right?
Definitely.
Because it was one of the, it wasn't the first, but it was the second or something.
Yeah,
it
it
was
was
the second of its
within
kind.
one of the first few schools of its kind. Yeah. So I'm sure other schools took note of how this one functioned and operated and incorporated some of its ideas.
Well, thank you guys for uncovering this story and sharing it. It's right down the road in Salisbury. It's incredible that this, same building. You guys, what are you guys doing after this? Are you guys taking this project in another direction?
Yeah, so we decided to come up with a documentary, and I think the big reason for that is that we've developed a pretty good relationship with the owner of the house. So we've actually been able to go in, take a couple tours of the home, see some parts of the house that are original and parts that were back when George and Henry were working at the school. So we conducted a few interviews there, got some footage of the house. So we hope to finalize a documentary in the coming months.
That's awesome. So you guys check out that documentary when it comes out. If you're hearing this or watching it, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Do you guys want to leave the viewers with anything else?
I'd say do some research about local history for sure. I'm sure there's some I don't know, similar story, but a pretty big story that we've yet to uncover. So,
And you never know.
yeah. Exactly.
How about you?
I'd say find something that interests you, even if it's history in your town or history in your state. I feel like it's good to get to know what's surrounding you.
Yeah. All right. That's awesome. Thank you guys for coming on. Thank you for tuning in to the Covering Your Past podcast. This has been Dominic Falson.
Ty Pereira.
Robert Morrison.
And have a good one.